Morning, breaking news today now. Today is the day President Trump takes his message on tax reform on the road, heading to Battleground, Pennsylvania, where he speaks at a rally packed with a big crowd of truckers. We will see that live later. A group that he calls the backbone of America says if the trucks are moving, America's moving. Good point, and good morning. I'm Bill Henry, live at America's News.
It's a good point indeed. Good morning, Bill. Well, I'm Sandra Smith. The president selling that tax plan this afternoon. But this morning in Washington, he's calling out Democrats, tweeting the Democrats want massive tax increases and soft crime-producing borders. The Republicans want the biggest tax cut in history and the wall. The president also spoke about taxes yesterday, promising a big solution to a big problem.
But I will say that we're the highest tax nation in the world. People want to see massive tax cuts. I'm giving the largest tax cuts in the history of this country. In addition to that, there'll be reform. So I think that it's politically, it's very positive. The people of the country want it.
Garrett Tenney live at the White House with what to expect. Garrett, good morning.
Sandra and Bill, good morning to you. The White House has already laid out its broad goals for tax reform, and it's really leaving it up to Congress to work out the details. And today in his speech in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the president is expected to again lay out those broad principles of what he wants to see get done. And a large part of his audience will be comprised of truckers, who the administration also says is the lifeblood of the economy and is a group who will significantly benefit from his tax reform plans. In one excerpt from the speech, the president expected to say, "When your trucks are moving, America is growing. That is why my administration has taken historic steps to remove the barriers that slow you down. America first means putting American truckers first." Now, President Trump is also expected to touch on several specific areas that he wants to see addressed in his tax reform, including the elimination of the so-called death tax, or the estate tax, which he and the administration claims will help small business owners and farmers be able to pass along their businesses to their family members. One other area the president is expected to touch on is a one-time low tax proposal to offer corporations to bring money they currently have overseas back to inside the states. And he says on that, "We will eliminate the penalty on returning future earnings back to the United States, and we will impose a one-time low tax on money currently parked overseas so it can be brought back home to America where it belongs." My Council of Economic Advisors estimates that this change alone would likely give the typical American household a $4,000 pay raise. Now, while the White House is continuing to push ahead on tax reform in Congress, the prospects of anything actually getting done before the end of this year are growing dim. Is little progress. Evidence of progress is shown up thus far. Sandra?
Garrett, do we have any more details on the executive order regarding health care the president talked about yesterday?
Yeah, the White House is reportedly putting the final touches on this executive order, which will allow folks to band together to buy insurance across state lines. But the president did speak a little bit more about that yesterday afternoon.
I'll also be signing something probably this week, which is going to go a long way to take care of many of the people that have been so badly hurt on health care. And they'll be able to buy, they'll be able to cross state lines, and they will get great competitive health care, and it will cost the United States nothing. Take care of a big percentage of the people we're talking about, too.
And in addition to tax reform and health care, the president also has NAFTA up on the table today. He'll be welcoming the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to Washington, D.C. for a fourth round of negotiations on that NAFTA deal, which that is still in the works as well. Sandra?
Garrett Tenney, thank you.
Let's analyze. Stephen Hayes, editor-in-chief, Weekly Standard, Fox News contributor. Good morning to you.
Morning,
there,
Bill.
my friend. Tax reform versus a standard tax cut. That seems to be where this debate might be heading, Steve.
Yeah, you've seen a shift, certainly in the language you're hearing from Republicans, not just in the past couple months, but really going back to the Republican primary, presidential primary. Remember, you had a debate about dramatic tax reform in the Republican presidential primary, and we've seen now that Republicans are pushing a much more modest plan. There's some very good elements in this plan, but the emphasis is on the tax cut rather than broader reforms.
Newt Gingrich yesterday was making the argument here on our show that tax cuts / reform, however it comes out in the end, is more important than health care reform. What do you think about that?
I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, I think if you had broad tax reform that really did simplify the code, it could have huge economic effects. But politically, especially for Republicans who have promised to repeal and replace Obamacare for 7 years, the failure to do that, I think, is going to have dramatic and long-lasting political effects.
Well, I think a lot of people 9 months ago thought both would happen.
Correct. I think that's right.
Now we're questioning whether or not both will indeed happen.
Well, you know, the big question, actually, Bill, I mean, just to pick up on that point, the big is whether Republicans learn their lessons from what happened on Obamacare, whether they are united in making this case, whether there's, I would say, stepped up presidential leadership with Donald Trump leading the charge, making the case as he's doing today in Pennsylvania, or whether there's going to be Republican infighting with the president taking sort of a backseat role and leaving it to Congress.
Well, here's a tweet from earlier today, and this is the stock market, and keep your eye on the Dow. I mean, we're looking at Dow 23,000 possibly. Stock market has increased $5.2 trillion since the election on November 8th, a 25% increase, writes the president, lowest unemployment in 16 years. And if Congress gives us the massive tax cuts and reform I'm asking for, those numbers will grow by leaps and bounds. Hashtag Make America Great Again. He is selling the economy and takes that message today to a part of the country that he shocked a lot of people in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, that's a good message from Donald Trump. I mean, that's exactly the kind of argument that he wants to be making at this point. And I think he can point to the stock market. He can point to broader business optimism in general since his election. The thing I think he needs to be careful of if he's going to point to the stock and broader economic indicators is the debt. I mean, we're talking about $20 trillion in debt, and there's no serious plan being advanced by the White House, by Republicans, certainly not by Democrats, to actually address what's driving that debt, and that's entitlements. That's
an excellent point. Thank you, Stephen Hayes. Analysis there.
Thanks, Bill.
Next hour, we'll go in depth on all this. Kellyanne Conway is here live. We'll talk to her then. Plus, Sean Hannity sits down with President Trump. Exclusive interview from Pennsylvania. You'll see it later tonight, 9 o'clock Eastern time, only here in prime time. And you with a big business background. All these arguments that we've had for years about the debt, now at $20 trillion, have disappeared.
This is a huge day, and you mentioned the stock market, and you're looking at the stock market at record highs. So much optimism has been created by this president. A lot hinges on this speech tonight.
And whether or not you can get it done.
And whether or not
and
they
if
can
you
get
do not get it done, what happens to that? Good point.
Allegations of rape and sexual misconduct are mounting against former movie mogul Harvey Weinstein. We're also hearing there are reports he has checked himself into a rehab facility. Here are some of the actresses that claim he's either assaulted or made unwanted advances toward them. Several also claim he retaliated when his advances were rebuffed. And now top Democrats who received big money donations from Weinstein are finally speaking out, including Hillary Clinton and former President Barack Obama. Jonathan Hunt live in Los Angeles with more. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning, Sandra. Those two statements coming close together yesterday evening. First, Hillary Clinton saying she was appalled by Harvey Weinstein's behavior. Then President and Mrs. Obama, who once entertained the movie mogul at the White House and called him a, quote, wonderful human being, issued their own statements saying they are disgusted at the reports of abuse and harassment and adding, quote, any man who demeans and degrades women in such fashion needs to be condemned and held accountable regardless of wealth and status. Now, Weinstein is rapidly running out of friends. The who's who of Hollywood that once revered or feared him is now condemning him. Jennifer Lawrence, George Clooney, Leo DiCaprio, Meryl Streep, all expressing horror at what he did. Gwyneth Paltrow and Angelina Jolie saying they were both victims of Weinstein's predatory ways. And an audio tape surfacing apparently revealing some of Weinstein's methods. He's heard pressuring a young actress to enter his hotel room in 2015 while she complains of being groped, part of a police sting that the Manhattan DA's office ultimately decided not to prosecute. Listen here.
I'm feeling very uncomfortable right now.
Please come in now and 1 minute, and if you want to leave when the guy comes with my jacket,
yesterday you touched my breast.
Oh, please, I'm sorry. Just come on. I'm used to that.
But are you used to that?
Yes, come in.
Weinstein's wife of 10 years has announced she plans to divorce him. Georgina Chapman saying, quote, "My heart breaks for all the women who have suffered tremendous pain because of these unforgivable actions. I have chosen to leave my husband. Caring for my young children is my first priority, and I ask the media for privacy at this time." And Sandra, as for Weinstein himself, he has, according to the reporting of TMZ, headed to Europe to enter a rehab center for sexual addiction. He's not made any public statement since last week. Now, we've reached out repeatedly to the PR firm, which is supposed to be representing him. They have repeatedly failed to reply to our emails and phone calls. Sandra?
Jonathan, thank you.
Seems to grow by the day with more and more people, too.
They keep digging, and it keeps getting worse.
Yeah, and there are political implications involved here, and we'll talk about that a bit later, about, the money on down the line over all the years and what happens to all that. So, in the meantime, conditions, they have gone from bad to worse in parts of California. 17 dead in these wildfires. The winds continue to make it even worse, and the struggles that the firefighters now face today, live in Napa Valley and all that. Plus, remember this from just a few weeks ago.
The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. That deal is an embarrassment to the United States, and I don't think you've heard the last of it.
Strong comments at the UN a few weeks, and now President Trump is expected not to recertify the Iran nuclear deal. So what will Congress do when the agreement gets kicked to Capitol Hill? House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce will hold a hearing on the Iran threat today, but he joins us first. That's next.
Also, President Trump saying it is about time. The NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell urging all the players to stand for the national anthem. More on that next.
We would certainly support the NFL coming out and asking players to stand, just as the president has done. We support the national anthem, the flag, and the men and women who fought to defend it.
I am one who would not have signed that deal. I've said that before. I don't think it was a particularly good deal. But sometimes you live with what you've got. And even if you decertify the deal, I hope that they'll find some way to keep it in place while they try to improve it. And I think that's the strategy that they are trying to carry out here.
So there's Condoleezza Rice telling Dana Perino yesterday about the Iran deal on the Daily Briefing, 2 o'clock Eastern Time here on Fox. Next hour, the House Foreign Affairs Committee holds a hearing on Iran, and sources telling us that President Trump will not recertify the deal. So if that's the case, what then? Ed Royce chairs the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Sir, welcome back here at America's Newsroom, and good morning.
Good to be with you, Bill.
Is that your expectation that he will decertify the deal?
I don't want to get out in front of the president in terms of his decision, but whatever he decides to do, I hope he will lay out the facts to the American public and then also lay out his expectations in terms of how Congress can work with the president moving forward on this issue of containing Iran.
Well, that's an excellent point, because that's the second part of the story. If he decertifies, it kicks it to Congress, essentially. What does Congress do, sir?
Well, this is one of the reasons we're having this hearing this morning. The point that I am making is that we have a whole series of decisions that Iran is making in terms of building up these ballistic missiles that are a direct threat to the United States. And so we have an opportunity to move forward with legislation that addresses that sanctions that issue, while at the same time addressing what we do about the flaws in the deal. And the biggest flaws, obviously, are the ones we've discussed, Bill, in the past. The fact that we can't go onto the military bases, and the fact that at the end of the agreement, the sanctions come off, and here's Iran, a nuclear state. Can we extend that agreement out? Can we work with the Europeans in this agreement to enforce the hell out of the agreement we've got, while adding to it these key provisions that will allow us to constrain Iran's dangerous behavior?
As you know, this is major headlines in Tehran. The foreign minister said this just yesterday. I hope the U.S. ruling body would not make the strategic mistake, but if it does so, then Iran's response will be firm, decisive, and crushing, and the U.S. should accept its consequences. What is the effect from Iran, or the impact on Iran, and how How concerned would you be with a response out of Tehran to cause more trouble in the region?
Well, I have already seen what Iran is doing in order to try to overthrow governments in the region. We've seen it in Syria, we've seen it in Iraq, we see it in Lebanon, we see it with their expansion of Hezbollah. They've already overthrown the government in Yemen. And so it's not as though Iran's bad behavior is suddenly going to go into overdrive. It's been in overdrive ever since. $100 billion is what their Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps got out of this agreement, and they're using that right now. And unfortunately, that toothpaste is already out of the tube.
It's pretty remarkable, right?
That was the giveaway by the former administration that has us so exercised. That's one of the reasons I led the opposition. But this is where we are right now with respect to Iran running full throttle. Yeah. This is why I think we need substitute sanctions that we now put on their missile program and their terrorist activity. That's not part of this agreement. Let's add to the agreement the provisions such as getting onto the military bases, but let's go right straight to this issue of their ballistic missiles and their terror, and let's work with the Europeans on that issue. Let's put those sanctions in place.
Wonder if you get support for that. I know James and Madison, Rex Tillerson, based on what I read, think he should not decertify it. What would you do if you were President Trump?
Well, in terms of my observations on this, my goal is to try to keep the Europeans working with us, and I think we can get them on additional sanctions. So I would, as I said, I would enforce the hell out of the current agreement, and I would figure out how to get the buy-in in order to get onto the military bases in terms of the investigation powers.
Does that mean you would talk the president out of decertifying?
Right. What I would do is I would keep the existing agreement and add to it. I think that's the better approach in order to address these concerns we have, because that keeps the Europeans on board working with us.
Saturday is the deadline.
Ultimately the goal.
That's right, October 15th. Sir, thank you for your time. Hearing starts in 40 minutes. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Bill.
Ed Royce from The Hill. Thanks.
Wildfires out of control in Northern California. Why today's weather is making it even harder for firefighters to put out those flames. We'll take you live on the ground. Plus, a beautiful moment in Las Vegas last night. Well, this is a Fox News alert. Raging wildfires in California's wine country have left 17 people dead. More than 100 people are reported missing. The fires broke out Sunday night in Northern California. Strong wind gusts up to 40 miles per hour will make it even harder for firefighters to contain those flames. Officials have been warning people to evacuate, and more than 25,000 people already have.
By the time I got up here to where my truck was hooked up to the boat, the fire was already halfway down the mountain, and there were embers everywhere, and the wind was just crazy, and there was this huge roar of the flames. And that's when I knew you're out of here. You know, I mean, that's when you hear that roar and you see the wind going like that, you know that there's nothing you can do.
Fox Business Network's Hillary Vaughn is live in Napa, where we continue to hear these just absolutely devastating stories. Hillary?
Sandra, it is devastating. We are here at one of the wineries in Napa that has been blanketed under ash after a wall of fire ripped through here. Behind me, this was a tasting room. You can see now it's essentially just rubble. This is just one scene of many around California wine country as homeowners, their homes and their livelihoods have gone up in flames. We talked to some of those homeowners that were evacuated from this area, and they said, one man told me that he went back to his neighborhood. He said it looks like a war zone. All that was left of the homes were the chimneys.
There's just nothing left in my entire neighborhood. I mean, my house survived, my barn burnt, but my neighbors, yeah, their houses are gone. It's like I'm going to go back eventually when I can, when there's electricity, but I'm the only one in the neighborhood.
Firefighters from California and Nevada are battling 17 different fires around the state. They are struggling to push back flames and get control of the blaze. They still do not have total containment. CAL FIRE Chief Ken Pimlott says they are deploying almost every aviation asset in the country and have already dumped a record amount of fire retardant from the air. 266,000 gallons have been dumped so far. As many as 17 people have died, over 20,000 evacuated, and the Sonoma County Sheriff says there's still at least 200 people unaccounted for. President Trump has approved the major disaster declaration for Northern California, which means FEMA is on its way to help with search and rescue, remove some of this rubble so these homeowners can begin to rebuild their lives again. But the threat is not over. With low humidity today and higher temps, red flag warnings could be issued. That's the highest alert for extreme fire conditions, which means essentially a simple spark could start a wildfire. The damage here still being assessed. Many people not allowed back into their properties to survey the damage, but the two industries here, Sandra, wine and tourism, have certainly been hit very hard.
Hillary, our thoughts are with all those affected by this. Hillary Vaughn, thank you.
No question. There's an elderly couple who have been married for 75 years. They're two of the victims in California. The son of Charles and Sarah Rippey says that he found his father's body halfway to his mother's room.
The winds were 30, 40, 50 miles an hour, and it was just like it was a firestorm. And it hit so fast, and they just didn't have a chance. We knew that, there was no way that, they would be happy, whoever was the last one. And so they went together.
They had been together since grade school. They were 198 years old each, 100, 198. And what a love story that is.
In the son's words, they went together.
Yeah, they went together indeed. Wow.
A former IT aide who worked for Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz and other Democrats is facing federal charges for bank fraud and conspiracy. And now lawmakers say they tracked that man's computer network. What they found and why they are calling him a substantial security risk.
Also, get ready for a rally. President Trump heading to Pennsylvania to sell his tax plan. Florida Republican Ron DeSantis here to tell us what he thinks about it and whether or not he'll vote for it. Next.
People want to see tax cuts, they want to see major reductions in their taxes, and they want to see tax reform, and that's what we're doing. And we'll be adjusting a little bit over the next few weeks to make it even stronger.
9:33 here in New York. President Trump touting the state of the economy. Will do so again later today and saying that proper tax reform could kick American job growth into overdrive. Tweeting this: stock market has increased $5.2 trillion since the election on November 8th, a 25% increase, lowest unemployment in 16 years. And if Congress gives us the massive tax cuts and reform I am asking for, those numbers will grow by leaps and bounds. Here's the Dow today. As we look at Dow 23,000.
Hello.
Up 11. I was just the other day we were talking about Dow 22,000. That's remarkable growth.
That's a big number.
9 months has it been? Going back to 9-10 months.
23,000 is not out of reach. Bill Hemmer. All right, we'll keep watching it. Stock market is open as of 3 minutes ago. Meantime, President Trump will travel to Pennsylvania to tout the Republican tax reform plan later today. And in part of his speech, he says it will amount to a much-needed pay boost or raise to the average American worker. We will eliminate the penalty on returning future earnings back to the United States, and we will impose a one-time low tax on money currently parked overseas so it can be brought back home to America, where it belongs. My Council of Economic Advisors estimates that this change, along with a lower rate, would likely give the typical American household a $4,000 pay raise. Joining me now, Florida Congressman Ron DeSantis. Congressman, good to see you. Can we stay with that one point? Because that sounds really interesting to a lot of people listening right now. A $4,000 pay raise. But even the president's close economic advisors say that that's spread out over a period of time, about 8 years to be exact. And that amounts to about $500 a year. Does this plan go far enough?
Well, the framework is there, Sandra. We don't have all the details. That's going to be flushed out. I think if you look at the rate reductions, that will provide immediate relief for American families, what they need. The simplicity of the tax code, going from 75,000 pages down to a simple system, will also give families more time and resources to spend on other things other than tax prep. And then by incentivizing companies to locate here, stay here, bring profits from overseas back here, I think there's going to be more employment opportunities opportunities for the American people. So I think some of it's going to be hard to quantify, but I think all those together is definitely a boon to middle-income taxpayers in this country.
Congressman, let me press you on that, though, because if it is that simple and the average American worker gets a pay raise and we see the economy go off and the stock market keeps rising, why are we even asking the question of whether or not there can be agreement, particularly just within your own party on the details the president has laid out?
Well, my friends on the other side of the aisle do not view tax policy as trying to ignite sustained growth. They view it really as an instrument of social justice to tax disfavored groups and to redistribute that to favored groups. That's not how most Republicans think. So I think there's just a philosophical divide within the Republican family. Look, I think the House is going to pass a strong tax reform bill. You have some of our members from high tax states do not want to get rid of the state income tax deduction. I think that's bad policy. I'd like to get rid of it. We're going to have to figure out a way forward on that. And then we're going to have to figure out a way with the pass-throughs, how you structure this 25% rate. But I think that's all very surmountable. I think we'll pass a bill to the Senate. Look, you know the Senate has had a lot of problems doing anything, so I don't think it's peculiar to tax reform. I'm hopeful that they'll be able to pass this, and I think it's really crunch time for the Republican majority in the Senate. We send them a good, solid, pro-growth tax.
Congressman, what do you think is going to be the biggest sticking point, if indeed it does pass through the House onto the Senate? What will be their biggest problem with this?
I think probably it's going to be some of the senators who gave the health care bill. I think that they have their own views. Some of them have opposed tax relief in the past and just really aren't engaged in wanting to cut taxes. And so I think the case needs to be made to them that we're really laying a foundation for sustained growth far into the future. I think it'll have immediate benefits for families. I think that's important. But man, if we can grow 3.5% for a number of years,
deal.
That's a huge deal for revenue and for jobs.
All right, that would be a big deal. And as you told me in our chat yesterday, the American people just want to see something get done. Last question to you, Congressman, on Iran. You just heard from Condoleezza Rice, who's saying she thinks it would be in the best interest of this country to stay in the Iran deal. Whether or not the president decides to recertify or decertify, that is the question right now. If he decides to decertify, that's not the end of it. It gets kicked to Congress. But what are your thoughts at this point?
I think he should decertify. I think he has to. Iran has not fully complied with it. They've exceeded heavy water stocks. They've exceeded the number of advanced nuclear centrifuges. And he cannot certify it's in the best interest of the United States to keep this deal, given Iran's belligerent behavior. Nothing has changed with them. They've only been empowered. So, yes, he should decertify. Then it will come to the Congress. I think we need to be stronger against Iran. They got a boon with $150 billion. Obama was flighting in cash pallets to the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps. That's been a disaster. We've got to tighten the screws on Iran, put them back in the box. Congress has an important role in that, but I think the president also will need to take some action.
But this is the important distinction, though. So you, like the president is expected to, you think decertify the deal is the best way to go. It gets kicked to Congress. Are you saying get out of the deal altogether?
Yes, I think so, because as I look at this deal, the best case scenario for the deal is 5 or 10 years down the road, we're in a North Korea situation with Iran, which is, of course, probably even more difficult to deal with because they're run by militant Islamists. So it is something that unless we change course, we know 5 or 10 years into the future, there's going to be a major crisis dealing with this country.
Congressman Ron DeSantis, a busy man. You're just on our couch and outnumbered in New York yesterday, back in D.C. Thank you for your time, sir.
Good to see you.
You gave him good practice yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Know that. Former staffer, a top Democrat, now labeled a substantial security threat. Investigators saying that Imran Alwan transferred massive amounts of data on government servers while he was on the payroll of several House Democrats, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who used to run the DNC. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen, live in D.C. for more on that. What's the story now, James?
Bill, good morning. House Republican Scott Perry of Pennsylvania, who sits on the cybersecurity panel of the Homeland Security Committee, aired these concerns about Imran Awan at an informal hearing attended only by fellow GOP lawmakers yesterday afternoon. Perry said the storage and flow of data arranged by Awan posed a, quote, substantial security threat to the United States. Awan was arrested at Dulles Airport in August and charged with bank fraud and other alleged financial crimes unrelated to his IT work for House Democrats. He has pleaded not guilty. Awan's wife, who worked with him and was also charged, agreed this summer to return to the U.S. from Pakistan. Perry detailed how a bag marked Rep. DWS was left for Capitol Police to recover from a phone booth in a House office building after midnight, one night in April, 2 months after House investigators banned Awan from access to House networks. The bag also reportedly included identification for Awan and letters effectively steering federal authorities to investigate Wasserman Schultz. Perry also alleged that over 5,000 unauthorized logins occurred on a server maintained by the office of the Democratic caucus chair at the time, Xavier Becerra, who is now California's Attorney General.
This means that up to 40 or more members of Congress had all of their data moved out of their office server or out of their cloud storage system and onto the Becerra server without their knowledge or consent.
Since he was first approached by the authorities, a spokesman for Becerra told Fox News, Attorney General Becerra has worked with them to provide them the information they have requested, so we would refer you to them. Lawyers for Imran Awan have told Fox News they believe their client is the victim of Islamophobia. Bill.
James Rosen, more to come on this. Thank you, sir, from Washington. Sandra.
Bill, it is a big day for everybody's money and taxes. Much more on the president's tax reform plan when we talk to Kellyanne Conway in the next hour, counselor to the president. Plus, we will get her take on the growing scandal surrounding Harvey Weinstein. Why did it take so long for Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama to even comment?
The question that is today. Also, is the NFL now standing with the president on these national anthem protests? And if so, too little, too late or not? We'll debate it in a moment. Next, right here.
If this industry is going to use money from American taxpayers to build the very fields they play on, is it really too much to ask that they show respect for the American flag at the beginning of the game? We would certainly support the NFL coming out and asking players to stand, just as the president has done. We support the national anthem, the flag, and the men and women who fought to defend it. And our position hasn't changed on that front. We're glad to see the NFL taking positive steps in that direction.
Sarah Sanders reacting to the NFL's decision now with siding with the president, it appears, over the national anthem protests. Letter to team owners, Commissioner Roger Goodell says he believes everyone should stand for the anthem to honor country and flag. Brad Blakeman, former Deputy Assistant President George W. Bush, Richard Fowler, radio talk show host and a Fox News contributor. Gentlemen, good day to both of you.
Good to be
Roger Goodell, here's the letter. Like many of our fans, we believe everyone should stand for the national anthem. The controversy over the anthem is a barrier to having honest conversations and making real progress on the underlying issues. We need to move past this controversy, and we want to do that together with our players, end quote. Could have done it a year ago, Brad, and you would not be facing this. So what?
No doubt about it. I think the commissioner is indecisive. He's feckless. And the only reason why he's caving now is because the fans have reacted, and they've reacted viscerally to players who take a knee for the national anthem. It's unacceptable. And if he were a leader, he would have stopped it the first time Kaepernick took a knee and said, in the NFL, we don't do this. We don't disrespect the flag. And as part of your employment, you'll stand for the flag. And if you don't want to stand for the flag, get in the locker room. But you're not going to take the field in our uniform, representing not only our brand, but also the fans, the city that it's played in, and the nation as a whole, and disrespect the national anthem. In my opinion, Bill, they need to sack Roger Goodell. And by the way, take your spokesperson with you, Joe Lockhart, who had a tin ear in not giving the proper advice and not giving the proper response.
And listen, he's made these owners a lot of money. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But here is the president's tweet earlier today. It's about time Roger Goodell of the NFL is finally demanding that all players stand for our great national anthem, respect our country. I don't know if he's demanding that, Richard. I don't know what comes of this. I think the handbook says should stand during the national anthem. And you wonder what sort of message the owners deliver to the players and whether or not ultimately they listen.
Well, this is a total conundrum to begin with. I agree with Brad, actually, that they should sack Roger Goodell. They should have sacked him a long time ago. But here's the problem. In 2009, this is when this all changed. Before 2009, there was no rule about anthems. Actually, some teams chose not to participate in the anthem at all. And then in 2012, the Department of Defense actually started to fund the pageantry of the anthem, right? So Department of Defense, U.S. tax dollars would go to, flyovers, to large flags being unveiled, and all sorts of things. And then players were sort of forced to...
Made for quite a moment.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, the shadow of 9/11, I mean, it was...
No, it was 2012. So it was 2009 is when they started to force players and force teams to go out to the pledge.
No, not force.
Yes, in 2009, there was an official rule that said teams had to participate in the national anthem. In 2012, the DOD started to fund it. Now we're in a situation where we have players who are saying we are not protesting the anthem, we're not protesting the troops, we are actually using our platform to fight against racial injustice. The president believes, and the vice president and a lot of folks who watch this air believe that this is, against the national anthem, against the troops. That's what it's not about. But here's the larger question that we've got to ask ourselves.
Hang on, I'm tight on time. Listen, we all work for someone.